The gavel never fell. That's the part one remember most, the silence after it should have. My hands were folded in my lap, but underneath the table, my fingers were digging into my own wrist, hard enough to leave 4 white crescents that stayed for an hour. Someone's chair scraped. A phone buzzed in a purse 3 rows back. And then I heard her laugh, my daughter's laugh, the one she used to have as a little girl on the tire swing, now aimed at me like a slap. The judge's gavel hovered an inch above the sound block. He wasn't looking at me. He wasn't looking at my daughter. He was looking past both of us, at a man in a gray suit sitting quietly in the second row, and his face went the color of old paper. He leaned toward his clerk and whispered 5 words. It's him. Get security now. Nobody in that room understood what he meant. Not yet. But I did, because I was the one who put that man there. My name is Diane Whitfield. I'm 61 years old, and 31 years ago, I started a catering company out of my kitchen with $600 and a set of mixing bowls that used to belong to my mother. By the time this story starts, Whitfield and Rose Events was doing $4.2 million a year in revenue, with contracts running through 3 states and a client list that included 2 governors' inaugural dinners. I built it after my husband, Robert, died of a heart attack at 44, left me with a 9-year-old daughter and a $38,000 life insurance check that barely covered the funeral and 2 months of rent. I built it with 14-hour days and a knee that still aches every winter from standing on concrete kitchen floors for 3 decades. My daughter, Vanessa, is 34. I raised her alone. I put her through a $52,000 a year private university without loans. I gave her a $180,000 down payment on her first house as a wedding gift. And on the day this story really begins, I was sitting in a courtroom because Vanessa, my Vanessa, and her husband had filed a petition to have me declared legally incompetent. They wanted guardianship. Not of me. Of my company. It started 4 months earlier at a dinner I paid for. Vanessa had asked me to meet her and her husband, Marcus Bell, at a steakhouse downtown. The kind of place where the bread alone costs $11 and the waiters wear black vests even in July. Marcus had married into the family 2 years before, all white teeth and firm handshakes, always talking about portfolio diversification and legacy planning, like he'd swallowed a finance textbook and never quite digested it. That night, Vanessa wore a blazer I didn't recognize, sharp-shouldered, expensive, not her usual style at all. She ordered a $34 glass of wine without looking at the menu, like she'd been there before, more than once. Marcus kept checking his phone under the table, and every time it buzzed, a small smile crossed his mouth before he wiped it away. Halfway through dinner, I mentioned, casually, the way you mention weather, that I'd been getting tired lately. 61 isn't old, but 61 after 3 decades of 16-hour shifts wears differently. Vanessa's eyes flicked to Marcus. Just for a second. A look I hadn't seen since she was 7 years old and about to lie to me about breaking a lamp. You should really think about slowing down, Mom, she said, swirling her wine. Maybe it's time to let someone else handle the business side of things. I smiled and said I'd think about it. But I'd built a company on reading rooms full of strangers for 31 years. I knew exactly what I'd just watched. I didn't confront anyone. I went home, made tea, and pulled up the company's financial dashboard on my laptop, the one only I had the master login for. I found a new signature authorization added 6 weeks earlier. Marcus Bell, listed as Senior Financial Consultant, Whitfield and Rose Events. I had never hired him. I had never even discussed hiring him. I called Marcus and asked, pleasantly, how long he'd been consulting for the company. Diane, I've just been helping streamline your accounts receivable workflow, he said smoothly. With the new SOC 2 compliance requirements and the volatility in short-term commercial paper, it made sense for someone with my CFA background to shore up the liquidity ladder before Q4. Vanessa mentioned you'd been overwhelmed, so I stepped in. No big deal. It was jargon soup, designed to make a tired 61-year-old woman nod along and change the subject. I nodded along. I changed the subject. That night, I called my longtime accountant, Harold, a man who'd done my books since 1996. He pulled the real transaction history. In 6 weeks, $340,000 had moved out of the company's operating account into 3 different LLCs, all registered to addresses that led back to Marcus Bell. 2 nights later, I came back to the office to grab a forgotten binder and heard voices in the break room. The door was cracked. I stood in the dark hallway and listened. She still thinks I'm doing her a favor, Marcus laughed. Once the guardianship goes through, we don't even need her signature anymore. We just need a judge who believes she's losing it. She's 61, not senile, Vanessa said, and for one heartbeat I thought, she'll stop this. But then she laughed too. She'll believe anything if you use enough big words. She always has. I stood in that hallway for 4 full minutes before I could make my legs move. I hired a private forensic accountant, paid $18,000 out of my own pocket, and told no one. 3 weeks later, she handed me a folder that turned my stomach. Marcus Bell wasn't his real name. He'd operated under 2 prior aliases, Marcus Bellwether and Mark Bellamy, and had been investigated in 2 other states for elder financial exploitation. Both cases had gone cold when the consultant vanished before trial. He hadn't married my daughter for love. He'd married her for me. I made a decision that night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with Robert's old watch in my hand, the one engraved to D, always, R. The one I still kept in a drawer because I couldn't bear to wear it and couldn't bear to sell it either. If they wanted a confused old woman, I would give them one. I started forgetting things on purpose, small things, in front of them. I'd ask Vanessa the same question twice in an hour. I let my voice go softer, slower, let my shoulders round forward when I sat. I stopped correcting Marcus's jargon and started saying, I don't really understand all that, dear, instead. I let my hands tremble slightly when I signed routine paperwork, just enough to be noticed, not enough to be believed by anyone actually paying attention. Inside, I was sharper than I'd been in years. Every soft, confused word I spoke was a brick in the wall I was building around them. Let them get comfortable, I told myself. Confident people get careless. Careless people leave evidence. They took the bait immediately. Within 2 weeks, Marcus filed the guardianship petition. Vanessa signed it as co-petitioner. I hired an attorney, David Okafor, and told him the truth, all of it, and asked him to help me build a case so airtight that it wouldn't just stop the guardianship. It would end them. I left a folder on my home desk, deliberately, where Vanessa would find it during one of her check-in visits. Inside were fake real estate documents suggesting I was planning to sell the company's headquarters building. Bait, nothing more, engineered to provoke exactly the kind of panicked conversation Marcus couldn't resist having. I also had a small recording device installed in the lamp beside my reading chair, the one Vanessa always sat in when she visited. Legal, one-party consent state. My attorney confirmed twice before I flipped the switch. 3 days later, my phone buzzed once under the kitchen table, a text alert from the recording app. I didn't touch it. I let it run. That evening, from my bedroom, I heard Marcus's voice through the wall, low and pleased with itself. Once the sale documents surface, we push the incompetency filing before she can object. Judge Holloway's calendar has an opening Thursday. I already knew Judge Holloway's name. I'd looked him up the week before. What I hadn't known, what I was about to find out, was that he already knew Marcus's face. The courtroom was fuller than I expected. Vanessa's attorney stood and read from a psychiatric evaluation, one I'd never actually undergone, based on secondhand claims from Marcus and a doctor whose license, my attorney had discovered 48 hours earlier, had lapsed 8 months prior in the state where he'd signed it. Marcus sat in the second row in his gray suit, watch glinting under the fluorescent lights, Robert's watch, the one I'd noticed missing from my drawer 3 weeks earlier and said nothing about. He'd taken it from my house during one of his check-ins. He wore it that morning like a trophy. When the attorney finished reading, Vanessa laughed, a short, sharp, disbelieving laugh, directed at me, as if the whole idea of my dignity was a punchline. Honestly, Your Honor, my mother hasn't been able to run a checkbook in months. That's when Judge Holloway's gavel froze in the air. That's when he looked past both of us to the second row, went pale, and whispered to his clerk. It's him. Get security now. I stood up. Calm. Quiet. I didn't raise my voice once. Your Honor, if I may, I said, that watch belonged to my late husband, Robert Whitfield. It went missing from my home 3 weeks ago. Mr. Bell is wearing it right now. Gasps. Marcus's hand moved instinctively to cover his wrist. I'd also like the court to know, I continued, that Marcus Bell has previously operated under the names Marcus Bellwether and Mark Bellamy, and was investigated for elder financial exploitation in 2 other states. I have the documentation. My attorney has already filed it with this court. I set the forensic accountant's report on the table, along with the recording transcript. Then I picked up the fake real estate folder, the bait, and tore it cleanly down the middle, the sound sharp enough to cut through the courtroom's stunned silence. That document was never real, I said. I wrote it myself, to see who would come running. Only one person did. 2 bailiffs were already moving toward the second row. Judge Holloway confirmed what I already suspected. He presided over one of the earlier cases against Mark Bellamy in a neighboring county 3 years prior, a case that collapsed when the defendant disappeared before sentencing. Mr. Bell, the judge said, voice like iron, you're going to want to sit very still. Within 6 weeks, the consequences arrived in order, like dominoes falling exactly where I'd stood them up. Marcus Bell was arrested in the courthouse parking lot on an outstanding warrant tied to the earlier exploitation case, plus new charges of fraud and grand larceny for the $340,000 diverted from Whitfield and Rose events. Bail was set at $500,000. He couldn't make it. The guardianship petition was dismissed within the hour, and Judge Holloway referred the fraudulent psychiatric evaluation to the state medical board. The doctor who signed it lost what remained of his license permanently. Vanessa was not criminally charged. The DA's office found no evidence she'd known about Marcus's aliases or his prior record, though her signature on the petition cost her something else entirely. 3 months of silence between us, and the end of her marriage, filed for annulment within the month. I didn't fire a single employee over this. The 2 junior accountants who'd unknowingly processed Marcus's transfers, following what looked like properly authorized paperwork, kept their jobs, their benefits, and a formal letter clearing their names for their files. I gave the whole staff a $2,000 holiday bonus that year, out of my own account, not the company's, a thank you for 31 years of people who never once tried to take what wasn't theirs. It was raining the night Marcus showed up at my door, 11 weeks later. Out on bail, awaiting trial, wearing a jacket too thin for the weather and shoes that had clearly walked farther than they were built for. Diane, he said, please. I have nowhere else to go. I made mistakes. I need somewhere to stay, just for a few nights. I looked at him for a long moment. Rain ran down his collar. Somewhere behind me, in the warm light of the kitchen, I could hear my new husband, Harold, the accountant who'd become far more than an accountant to me over the past year, quietly setting the table for 2. No, I said. Just that. Calm. Final. I closed the door. Harold looked up when I came back into the kitchen. He didn't ask who it was. He already knew. You all right? He asked. I'm better than all right, I said, and I meant it. For the first time in months, the ache in my chest was gone, replaced by something steadier. I'm home. Here's what I learned, the hard way, at 61 years old. The people who count on you to seem small are usually the ones most afraid of how big you actually are. Play weak if you must, but never forget your own strength while you're doing it. If someone in your life has ever underestimated you on purpose, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. Have you ever had to play dumb to protect yourself from someone who thought they had you fooled? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story hit home, hit like, subscribe for more, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.